Hello, good afternoon, British and American culture class. As you know, there is no quiz this week and there is no homework either, but I am going to assign something for you to do 2 weeks later, something for you to hand in before we do the midterm, because there's one assignment in the British section and one assignment in the American section. So there's nothing this week. You have no homework. You just have to listen to this lecture as usual and pay attention and make some notes. I'm going to set up an assignment on the cyber campus. You'll have 2 weeks to write this. What I want you to do is remember when we talked about the ways that you might understand cultural symbols. It's at the beginning of the book, page 38, going through to the end of the introduction. So on page 38, it says, you can analyze any representation of culture through its social, cultural, or historical context. In the textbook, there's an example, Abraham Lincoln, or an English breakfast, or an American bald eagle, or there's Alexander Graham Bell, the supposed inventor of the telephone, who is claimed by Scotland, England, and Scotland, Great Britain, Canada, and the United States. All think that he belongs to them, but he kind of belongs to all three of us. Anyway, you can choose a person, you can choose an object, you can choose a flag, you can choose an animal or something. You can analyze anything. That you can talk about Henry VIII, or you can talk about English religion, right? You can talk about Anglican Church. These are all parts of British culture. What I want you to do is choose any aspect of British culture. It can be an event, it can be a thing, whatever you're interested in. It would be better if it wasn't something that I already talked about in detail. Like if you talk about Henry II and you say everything that I said in class, you're not going to get a good grade because you're just repeating what I said. But what I want you to do is I want you to take these ideas and apply them to your own choice, something that you're interested in. Don't choose English breakfast or Alexander Graham Bell or the something from the text that's explained already. But you're welcome to choose. For example, I just kind of mentioned people like Edward III or Edward I. You might choose that. I haven't explained some of the things in great detail. And if you want to do that, that's fine. Break them down. Social context, historical context, and cultural context, right? So to remind you, when you look at a representation, person, event, thing, object, whatever, the social context is used to analyze the world and around the thing when it's invented, when it's used, what happens in the lifetime of the person, or when the thing is created. That's the social context. What people respond to it. We use the word milieu because it means in the middle of something. So what happens to that thing, how it's created, and what it's received like. Historical context is the next thing, which means something, it happens before and after, and like things like the Union Jack, the flag of Great Britain. It's on the back of their products. It's used like a brand. Like when you drive a British car, like a Mini Cooper, there's a Union Jack on it. Why is it there? Well, that's both a historical thing and a cultural thing. There's Union Jacks on everything. They have them on their military uniforms, and it represents something. In different ages, it represents something. The Union Jack now is supposed to be sort of like a representation of the quality of British goods. That's cultural context. That's an idea. It might represent the idea of British Empire. It might represent the idea of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England and Wales being together, right? Being unified, okay? It might represent a military or economic strength, or it might represent scientific innovation, or, the center of global trade. It might represent London, These are ideas. That's cultural context. Historical context is events, like I talk about in order, what happens, and then what happens here, what happens then, what happens after that. And social context, again, is like, why did they do that? How did they do it? When did they decide to do it? And what did people think about it when it was created? Well, then you have to talk about 1707. You have to talk about the Act of Union. You can't go to encyclopedias. You can't go to Wikipedia and answer this question. This assignment can't be done that way. Okay? You have to think about it. You have to get the information and you have to organize it yourself. It's if you copy anything, not only are you going to be cheating and get a 0, but you're not answering the question. So I can tell you have to answer the question the way I asked you to. If you want to get an A, you have to choose something you're interested in and then talk about the 3 different aspects and explain it to me. It's not a hard assignment, but you have to follow the instructions. If you just give me the history of Edward III, he was born, he became a prince, he overthrew the government, and he called a parliament, and he made some concessions, and then he started the 100 Years' War, and then he fought, and he had many sons, and one of the sons was a black prince, and then he died, and then they took a break. They made peace in the 100 Years' War, and then Edward III died, and the next king was King Richard II, and he was just his grandson, so he was a teenager boy, and that led to the Peasants' Revolt. If you just give me a summary, your grade's going to be very low. Okay, I want you to analyze it. I want you to tell me what you think. I want your opinion. I don't want Wikipedia's opinion. I don't want Naver or Google's opinion. It's up to you to tell me what you think about it and to explain it in the context. Okay, that's what the assignment is about. I do these assignments so that later, if you want a reference letter from me or something, because you did really well in the class, if you get an A in the class, you make a good effort, and I have to write a reference letter, and I have to say what kind of work you did in the class. I can look at your assignment and say, yes, this student understood, this student has critical thinking skills, I can recommend them for a job, I can recommend this person for a university position, student exchange program, graduate school, whatever. Okay? That's the assignment. I will set it up on the cyber campus, and it's going to be due 2 weeks from today, which is 2 weeks from Friday. It's going to be posted. It's not actually Friday today, but it's going to be posted on the 8th. So the assignment will be due on the 22nd of April. So you have 2 weeks to do that. All right, now we better get back into the 16th century craziness, because behind me there's a lot of stuff on the board. Let's finish up talking about religion. At the end of last lecture, I was talking about just the clear differences between Protestants and Catholics. Obviously, Protestants are in a sense, an opposite to Catholic, because that's why they created a new church. They want to be different, right? They still believe in Jesus, they still believe in God, they still believe in the Holy Spirit. But for example, a lot of these, parts of the Catholic Church, they're Calvinist because of John Calvin. I said, one of the things that he said is he believes in something called predestination. Predestination means that before you're born, your fate is already determined, okay? It's sort of determinism. So no matter what you do in your life, you're either going to hell or you're going to heaven. That's a pretty serious thought, that no matter what you do, it's already decided what's going to happen to your soul. Catholics believe that you could get into heaven by doing good works, by the way you behave, right? You need forgiveness of your sins. Nobody's perfect except Jesus, but everybody has to ask forgiveness. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody does bad things. So you must ask for forgiveness, and you must compensate, right, for what you do that's bad. So you must go to confession, and you can you can make donations to the church, and you can do charitable acts for the things that you do wrong, for your sins. But Calvinists don't believe that. John Calvin had this radical proposition that you should be a good Christian, but you should be a good Christian just because that's the example of Jesus. We have no control, no matter what you do, no matter how much you pray, but you better pray. You better pray because that's the model that you follow. So it's the motivation to do the things that you should in your religion has changed, right? The church has control of it, and your behavior is punished or rewarded, and there's a lot of money involved in it. But really, all the people who are more radically Protestant, the Calvinists, the Presbyterians and the Puritans, and the Baptists, there's others over there that follow the Calvinist doctrine. And they essentially, that philosophy means that you're doing what you should do on earth, regardless of whether your soul is going to heaven or hell. Right? So what happens is nobody knows, right? Nobody knows. You can just kind of judge or guess what's going to happen to somebody's soul, but it really starts to have less meaning to a person who's like, well, I'm just going to be a bad person because I don't know. That doesn't really make sense either. So you're supposed to still be a good person, even if in the end, you're going to find out that you're condemned to hell no matter what you do. You still attempt to live the life as strictly as possible. In fact, because you can't do good works to compensate, all of the Puritans and Presbyterians are very serious about studying the Bible and praying and following the rules as strictly as possible. They actually like Mosaic law. They like the Old Testament even more than they like the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament. So in some sense, they're almost like have some sort of closeness to the Jewish religion. It's to me, and I grew up Presbyterian. My father is a Moksanim. Okay, so I understand this stuff very intimately, personally, and I've grown up studying it academically. And some of these things obviously have some serious contradictions. So don't worry about that too much, because I know some of these things don't seem very logical or reasonable, but they did spend hours and hours, and very, very intelligent people thought about these things carefully and tried to figure out a way to practice religion that matched their conclusions. Okay, but all of these super intelligent people who were studying and knew 5 different languages, Arminius and Martin Luther, who created the German Bible, Tyndale, who made the English Bible, which was burned many times. Like a lot of these things were burned when they were first created. John Calvin and Zwingli. There's all kinds of these people's names. Sir Thomas Aquinas is a Catholic. There's all kinds of them, and they try to use different Greek philosophies, and they try to use new ideas and fuse these ideas with Enlightenment ideas and humanism. Everything gets really mixed up. Okay, but we can't talk about all of these things in detail because that would be its own course. So this is my model here. This is basically what you need to know. Everybody was Catholic, basically, in some form. The Catholic religion was practiced differently in Ireland than England, than France, than Spain, and Italy. There's variations of it, but they're all organized by the Pope. And there is a universal European Catholic Church. It's a pan-European Christian religion. In the East, you have Eastern Orthodox, there's Greek Orthodox, and there's Russian Orthodox, there's Serbian Orthodox, there's the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is another thing, but we're talking about Central and Western Europe, right? And that is all organized together as one Christian church. It starts to fracture and break apart because of Martin Luther. When the divorce becomes the great matter, right? The king's great matter. This here. Nobody wanted to call it the divorce. Nobody called it that. They called it, and officially is an annulment. Annulment. So just like when Arthur died, when Henry's older brother died, they annulled his marriage, so they canceled it. It's not a divorce. What he's trying to do is argue that his marriage was never legal to Catherine in the first place, right? It's because she was married. This is the ironic thing. He got her marriage annulled to her brother, his older brother married her, and he's going to argue that marriage, it was legitimate. They canceled it so they could get married, but now he's basically, part of their argument is she was married to another person, so therefore she can't be married to Henry, even though they have a daughter. You imagine how Mary feels right now, like that her father is trying to disown her and cancel his marriage to her mother. I don't really know the details. Mary is young, and Henry isn't interested in her. She's like almost like a Spanish princess, like her mother, because she's English. She speaks Spanish, but she's Catholic. Like, she's going to remain Catholic, seriously Catholic, her whole life. And she's going to have more in common with her mother because her father just ignores her because he just wants a son. And Henry, even whatever children he ends up having, he's not going to pay attention to them very much. He's really busy. He's fighting wars. He's embroiled in political and legal and theological questions. So he's the type of father that's not going to be playing with the kids in his free time. He's busy. He's busy, and he also has his, adventures, his hunting and his drinking and his friends in his free time to deal with too. So he's going to try and cancel his marriage. So he canceled his wife's marriage to somebody else so that he could get married. Now he's going to cancel his marriage because she was married, and it's already been canceled. So it doesn't make sense to the Pope. It's like, the old marriage is already gone. It doesn't count anymore. You can't do that. But he's going to try to do it anyway. They don't call it a divorce because that's not really what it is. It's not a separation, it's a cancellation. But everybody is never going to say, if anybody catches you talking about Henry, he has a temper just like the old Henrys we talked about, the guy who used to chew the carpet hundreds of years ago. He's a tyrant. He's very powerful, and if he gets angry or he feels like he's been disrespected, the worst thing that can happen to you is death. So nobody talks about it as the annulment or the king's divorce or the queen's problem. They just say the great matter. It means like referring to some issue, right? The king's issue. When he decides to do this process and it fails, he is Catholic. Let's be clear here. Henry VIII is a devout Catholic. He doesn't want not to be Catholic. He just doesn't want to be under the control of the Pope. And he decides, if I'm not going to be under control of the Pope, the whole kingdom is not going to be under the control of the Pope either. So I'm going to create my own church, the Church of England. Okay? In other words, the Anglican Church. It will become the Anglican Church, but it's called the Church of England. And he's going to cut all the connections between the Church of England and the church in Rome, the Catholic religion. Okay? But he doesn't want it to change too much. He pretty much wants everything to remain the same. He still wants priests, he wants bishops, because actually, we talked about the chain of being. The king is at the top and all the way down to the bottom to the peasants and the slaves. And the Pope is on the top and all the way to the bottom to the people, the poor, the slaves, and the laity, right? It goes Pope, cardinals, archbishops, legates, bishops, priests, abbots, right? All the way down the ranks to the bottom. And the kings are in there, politically they're in their own chain, but they're roughly equal. They're like parallel chains. So like if you destroy the religious chain, you're kind of weakening your own political, human chain. So he wants to maintain the structure of the church. He just wants to kick the Pope out of the top and then put himself at the top. So that's what he does. He becomes, in 1534, there's the act of supremacy, okay? And there's another act in 1534 which declares that the United Kingdom is an empire. Actually, in Korean history, the same thing happens. At the end of the Chosun Kingdom, Chosun declares itself an empire. And we're going to talk about the British Empire later. It's not the same kind of empire. Imperator means that imperialism in the Roman sense just means that you have absolute power over your own territory and there's no other, power above you, that you have imperium. All right. This is the idea of the Roman thing, is that you have complete power over something, complete dominance. Okay. Later on, they're going to have, an empire which spreads out, and London is going to be the center of this global empire. That's not the same thing as this. What Henry VIII is saying is that the Pope, anybody else, literally, there's dukes and earls and barons in England, and there's people in Ireland and Scotland, and Scotland's independent, but Ireland is under control of the English at this time, and will be under their control, for the next 400 years. So anybody within their territory has to be directly under the power of him. Similar to what William the Conqueror did. William the Conqueror said, all of England belongs to me now, and everybody must swear allegiance to me. But this is even a step further, because William the Conqueror was Catholic, and the Pope was above him in a sense. This eliminates that. The Pope has no power, and everybody has to swear allegiance to him personally. And if they don't, then they get executed. There's several famous people. Sir Thomas More is the most famous because he wrote this book called Utopia. And he was a writer. He was an author. He was a lawyer, and he was the Lord Chancellor. He was one of the most important people in the entire kingdom. He worked for Henry VIII. He was one of Henry VIII's best advisors. He helped him through the process of negotiating through the divorce. But then when he decided that he wanted to cut his ties with the Catholic Church, and he drafted the Act of Supremacy and got Parliament to approve England as an imperium, an absolute imperium. He is the head of the church, and that England was now not Catholic anymore. When he did that, Sir Thomas More quit, refused to participate. And then when Henry VIII demanded. He demanded that Sir Thomas More make a promise, take an oath of allegiance to him as the head of the church. He said, I cannot do that because I'm Catholic and I owe my allegiance to the Pope. I will serve you faithfully. I haven't done anything wrong, but I will not take this oath. And he gets executed. One of the most brilliant, it was a tragedy. He ended up being a martyr for the Catholic Church because he refused, and he was actually seemed like a very good person. Sir Thomas More was also very loving to his family, which is not something that wasn't possible, but it was less common, for somebody to be a nice father who cared, there's no evidence of him like disciplining his children. He cared for them. He was a family guy. He was multilingual. He was fluent in Latin. He wrote Utopia in Latin. This is like a superstar, basically. And the only thing he won't do is, admit that Henry VIII is the head of the church instead of the Pope. He refuses to do that. And so Henry VIII kills him. That's Henry VIII, right? It's like I don't want to get too political or anything, but it's like a Kim Jong-un, other authoritarian. Vladimir Putin is rumored to do that too. When people disagree with you publicly, they put you in jail. And if you cause too much trouble, they kill you. That's what Henry VIII did. If somebody disagreed with him, had another opinion, it was not okay. And he gave you a chance, if you were important and he liked you, he gave you a chance to change your mind publicly and say that he is right. And if you didn't, cut your head off. Okay? That's what happens when you mess with Henry VIII. Thus, history remembers him as a tyrant, not as a warrior king or a handsome, young, multi-talented person. We remember him as this guy who killed people all the time and had this grip. He had this confidence and power over the kingdom, which stabilized the kingdom. But as you can see, there was a dysfunctional aspect to England while he was the king. Because whenever he got angry or he had a strong opinion, there was nothing really people could do unless they wanted to risk their life. So that's what happens. There's a whole bunch of people that when the church becomes disconnected from Catholic religion, they remain Catholic and they don't want to change. But they're afraid of what Henry's going to do, so they do it secretly. Then there's a whole bunch of other people that think that changing the church a little bit is not good enough. They want what Luther says. They want real Protestantism, like what's in the book. They want English Bibles, and they want to get rid of the bishops. They don't want anything to do with the Pope. They want to study the Bible themselves, and they don't want all these ceremonies and saints and all this decoration. So they end up ransacking the monasteries. Henry VIII and all of his men go around and they take possession of the wealth of the church. They take the property, they take the gold, they take the silver, they take the sacred objects, and they possess them, and they get huge amounts of money. The church owns a lot of property. As you know, in every town there's a monastery, and there's abbots, there's abbeys, and there's cathedrals, and they take everything. And this is a huge amount of money. Where's my notes? So this is the divorce, right? Why is the divorce happening? First thing, the main thing is Henry VIII, he wants a son, right? Edward, right here. The first thing is, why is he getting a divorce, right? The King's Great Matter, remember, they don't actually say that out loud. That could be a tricky question. If I want to be tricky, okay, but I'll just call it a divorce, but it's not really a divorce. He's going to separate, he's going to cancel his marriage with Catherine because he needs a son, because he needs somebody to legitimize his rule. When he dies, he needs somebody to inherit the kingdom. Right now, he only has Mary. And Catherine's too old to try and have another baby, and her pregnancies have not gone well anyway, so they lost their chance. So they go through the trial. Pope refuses to go along with it, so he just dissolves the Catholic Church in England, possesses all the wealth, takes all the money. Obviously, this is a huge motivation. He needs money anyway, and that the church has a huge amount of money. So once the Pope makes it impossible for him, he makes the decision, okay, so the Pope's not going to let me do this. I have to do this anyway. So when I do this, I'm going to take all the money. Third thing is a political motivation, because now he is the head of the church. All the taxes, not just the wealth that is there, but the church's taxes is going to up the chain. He's the top of the chain now. So all the money, all the future money of the church is also going to be under his control. He's going to get to choose the archbishops. He's not going to have any struggles like with Becket, right? He's not going to have Henry II's problem with dealing with this renegade archbishop that doesn't listen to him. He's going to choose the archbishop, and if the archbishop doesn't behave, he's going to kill him, or he's going to replace him, or he's going to throw him in jail. Henry II couldn't really do that. That's why he said, will no one rid me of this? I can't do anything, because he's under the power of the Pope. He's under the protection of the Pope. That's why it was stupid that those four guys, actually those knights, thought that's what he wanted, and they went to kidnap him, and when they couldn't kidnap him, they killed him. That was really dumb, right? Because he didn't have any power to do that. Henry VIII will have that power, right? So he goes to Canterbury, and he destroys the shrine, because he doesn't like Becket. Because Becket rejected the power of the king. And Henry VIII wants to have all the power consolidated in himself. This is his chance to unify the church and the government and the kingdom under his control. Sometimes historians call this the Tudor Revolution, because in the next 10 years, he's going to do this with sort of everything. The church is not going to have control over local towns. Remember, I said the church is going to be the center of every town. It's going to control education. It's going to be social services. It's going to be charity. Then gradually, over the 16th century, there's going to start to be a public school system. The first grammar schools are going to start to appear in Edward's reign. And subsequently, people like Shakespeare are going to go to school when they're young. Instead of just learning to read privately, if you're rich, you just have a private teacher, or you would go to the church and learn from a priest or from a monk or something like that. Instead of that, there's going to be classes and there's going to be teachers who are often priests, right? Usually the teachers in the grammar schools are still Anglican priests or secret Catholic priests, because they're still the ones who are educated. But it's not under the church's control. These schools are going to be sponsored by the crown, by the government. It's the beginning of the public school system. This is a very modern thing. We expect everybody, universal public education is a feature of modern life. All of us went to school. You can go to private school, you can go to international school, but everybody gets to go to public school. It's supposed to be a right. It's supposed to be something that everybody can do. Now, these public schools, you still had to pay for your pencil, your paper, and your charcoal and your candle and some books. And so like poor people couldn't send their kids to grammar schools because there wasn't funding for it. It was still sort of open to everyone, but if you could afford it. It's more like the Hagwon system in Korea, where you can study at Hagwons as much as you want, but you got to pay. There's a certain amount of money that has to be paid for, buses and fees and teachers and buildings and stuff. If you don't have enough money for that, then you don't get to go to the Hagwon. Even after school programs usually require a little bit of money, and there's that kind of stuff. That's people who are really poor can't afford to send their kids. So Shakespeare is not a poor kid. He's more of like a lower middle class or middle class, but not wealthy enough to go to Oxford or Cambridge later. So I'm getting off track here a little bit, but this is what's going to happen. The church is going to be reoriented around the country. So we've got what we've got here is like the first, some people argue the first nation, right? The first nation in Europe. It's got its own national religion. Okay? None of the other European states have a national religion. It's a European religion. They're Catholic. It's not, the church isn't like, isn't self-sufficient. It's interconnected. That's a good thing in some ways. It's a good thing. I'm not arguing nations are more advanced or better than what we had before, because now we have the European Union, right? And the European Union is more like all the European countries working together and having this pan-European relationship, which is obviously an advanced thing that helps avoid a lot of problems. It's an economic benefit. It enables people to move from country to country more easily. And of course, it prevents people from, starting wars. One of the main reasons the European Union exists is that we're trying to stop Germany in France from destroying each other all the time. The United Kingdom is now not part of that. This is more traditional, that the United Kingdom, since the end of the 100 Years' War, is self-contained. It's not a European entity. So this is the moment here in 1534. They don't have land in France anymore, except for this tiny little thing called Calais. And yeah, Calais is going to get lost when Mary is queen. So they're going to have no territory in France. They have no European territory. It's an island, and that island is self-contained. And this is what Henry VIII does. Scotland is going to say, okay, we definitely don't want to be Church of England. So we're going to make our own Church of Scotland. They're going to have a guy named John Knox. John Knox is going to be a Calvinist, and he's going to start creating this church. There's going to be a division in Scotland between the Highlanders still being Catholic and the Lowlanders being Protestant, but essentially the Presbyterian Church has more power, population, the capital, Edinburgh, Glasgow, the big Scottish cities. They're not that big compared to other European cities, but the Scottish cities they're going to transform into this Church of Scotland model, and they're gradually going to get rid of bishops and archbishops and the structure, and they're going to turn it into like, a real Protestant, a more extreme or more radical or more unorthodox Catholic, Protestant type. We'll have to talk about these things again later, but most significantly, before we go any further with the religion thing, is Anglican is in between, right? Just Presbyterian kind of fits the model I showed you in the book very well, and Anglican is kind of in between Catholic and Protestant. And as I told you, one of the reasons for that is because Henry VIII, inside, he's still Catholic, right? Now, when he dies, though, what's going to happen really is people are going to start to believe in the ideas of the Reformation. So they're going to think Protestant, but on the outside they like people like holidays, people like festivals, they like their saints, they like their holy objects, they like having the bishops, the organization of the church is comfortable. So when you go into an Anglican church, in some ways it's going to look Catholic. Like the bishops are there and the crosses are there and the tables are there and everything. So it's going to remain in appearance more Catholic than Presbyterian or Puritan or Leveler or Ranter or Quaker or anybody else. I forgot the Quakers. But we can talk about those other branches later. All of these are like politically and religiously more radical. They're different, and they're pushing to be as different as possible from the Catholic Church. The Anglican is in the middle. It's a conservative change. And that's partly because Henry VIII and the other kings and queens don't want it to be completely different because, as I said, the Pope is a prince. And if you destroy the whole system, what's the point of having a king or a queen? King James, who is going to be the king after Elizabeth, is going to say, if you have no bishops, why do we have a king? It's a good question, right? If there's no structure in the church and everybody's equal, why would we have a king? That's not the way society is organized. It's organized in a chain, in a triangle. There's lots of people at the bottom and there's a king at the top. But what if you just make everybody equal and everybody reading the Bible and everybody can interpret it? There's no organization. So the whole structure falls apart. Okay, so don't worry about this part yet, because I'm gonna keep this in the middle of the board from class to class to remind you. But let me address it because you're gonna see it and wonder what it is. These are the 5 issues that are going to have to be solved somehow. And this is an idea that I got from a professor of history named Robert Buckles. He's an American and he's an expert about 16th and 17th century history. And he identifies these 5 issues, okay? So I want you to keep them in mind, and I'm going to remind you about them throughout. But from Henry all the way to the end of the 17th century, so from 1500 to 1700, for the next 200 years, these are the main problems that the Kingdom of England, the culture of Britain, because at the end of this period, it's going to be Britain. I'm going to start saying British instead of English suddenly, okay? So at the end of this period, part of the solution is the Kingdom of Great Britain is the solution to this. And all of these problems are going to, have very serious effects throughout, okay? Religion, you can see Henry VIII, he has a problem with religion. He changes the religion because of his divorce. He takes all the money from the monasteries. The role of the Catholic Church is diminished. So now you're going to have to do something to replace it. You can't just take away all the support of the church and then have nothing. The people need something. And the government's going to have a bigger role. So you got the religion. Sovereignty. Sovereignty means who is in power, who's in control. Henry VIII is obviously in control, but when he dissolves the Catholic Church, you know who approves it? Parliament. So who is making the decision? He is, but who legitimates it? Who makes it law? Who makes it happen? Parliament, right? So what we have here is Henry VIII, obviously in power. Obviously everyone's scared of him, but he uses the Parliament to support him. Parliament is the junior partner. The king is the leader, Parliament's a junior partner. They're partners, right? So this is going to cause a problem because Henry VIII is a strong person. He has the powerful character and good leadership skills, and nobody's going to question what he does. Even though his decisions might be wrong, he's decisive and strong, and nobody's challenging him. But when you get a weaker leader, there's going to be this power struggle between Parliament and the king. That's the problem of sovereignty. Local control. Now, this is related to the church. Every town, every region, Wales, Ireland, every place, there's not that powerful control. England doesn't have an army. They don't have a police force. The king just has, his guards, his security guards, but he doesn't have an army, right? He raises an army to fight a war, and then he comes home, and everybody goes home. They don't have a standing army. Well, you don't have a military, operating all the time. It's just not there. What he does have is he has local leaders like lords and dukes and barons, and they have soldiers, and they protect their areas, right? This is going to be a problem too, because periodically, some of these powerful guys on the frontier, on the edges of England, I know maybe you do think England is big, but if you're from another country like Canada, England's a very small place. But compared to Korea, it's not that small. It's bigger than Korea, a little bit bigger. So like the edges are, imagine it's like a king, like King Sejong, and around Seoul, which I think was called Hanyang back then, he has very tight control of the situation. Gyeonggi-do is under his control, and at the time, Chosun included North Korea. So Pyongyang and all of this area he controls. But up in Hamgyongdo, way up near the border of Russia and China, up there, who knows what's going on? He needs representatives up there. Way down in Jeollanam-do, and down in Jindo and on Jeju, he has no idea what's going on. He's the king. There's no king of Jeju, but there's got to be a representative of the king managing Jeju, because he can't do it. He can't be there all the time. He can't be in the corner in Busan, in Gyeongsang, and Hamgyongdo, and Gangwon-do, and then in Baekdusan. He can't be those places, so he's got to have people representing him. Those people have a lot of independence, and they will challenge periodically the power of the king or the queen. But increasingly, they're going to centralize power. They're going to increase the power of the government, the central government in London. So there's going to be a tension there between local government and central government. And you can see in the United States, there's still a lot of, in Korea, basically it's centralized. Everybody knows Gyeonggi-do, Gangwon-do, Chungcheong, we do what the federal government says. But in other countries, it's not like that. The relationship between, for example, states in the United States and the federal government, right? Between Texas and Washington, D.C., is sometimes Texas says, no, I'm not listening to you. Like, this is more like the problem as England. It's an English problem originally. They brought it to the United States. Finance, always a problem. As I told you, it's going to be an even bigger problem because Henry VIII doesn't raise taxes. Instead, he gets money from his dissolution of the monasteries. He takes all the money from the church, but he spends it all and it's gone, right? And so he doesn't raise taxes. And then Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth are also going to have, trouble raising taxes because they don't want to make people angry. So they don't. They try and find other ways to get money. And so by the time you get to the 17th century, the English, the Kingdom of England is taxing, the taxes are way out of date. Prices have gone up 600% and the taxes are the same. It's good for the people, but the government has no money. It's impossible to run a government if you don't collect taxes. There's got to be some money coming in, and it's way out of date. So this financial problem, whenever they go to war in particular, wars are really expensive. They need money badly because the taxes are already too low. It's not like Richard II where they're overtaxing people. They're really vastly undertaxing people. By the time Queen Elizabeth dies, they're undertaxing people, like I said, by about 600%, which is crazy. So of course they have no money. Foreign policy, how they deal with Spain and France, this is going to be a big problem. They're going to start having wars with everybody. And they're going to, again, it's going to be too expensive. So they're going to start a war and run out of money and then stop it and then start it. And all the other kingdoms are going to have the same problem with money issues. So it's not surprising that this is going to affect, whether they're at peace or whether they're at war or their diplomatic relationships with other countries. So these are these five big factors in problems throughout these next lectures. Just keep them in mind, okay? And like I said, the plus one factor is who is the leader? Who's the king? How well can they manage? Queen Elizabeth manages all these problems somehow because she's a genius, essentially, and she juggles all of these problems and balances and manipulates them and puts people against each other and, cheats and lies and explains things and avoids things. She's just a political genius. There's no other way of putting it. Elizabeth I should probably be called Elizabeth the Great. If she was a man, I'm sure she probably would have got that title. But the thing is, she has a very difficult situation because all of these things are a problem for her. And she manages to have a stable reign of 40 plus years, even though she's under that kind of pressure the whole time. It's amazing. Her brother Edward and her sister Mary are not going to be successful. James I, her nephew after her, is also going to have a lot more problems. Pretty much everybody else is not going to deal with the problems. Henry VIII, I'm not going to say Henry VIII created all these problems because it's not all his fault, but he ignored them. He ignored these problems. And so by the time you get to James, after the three Tudors have their turns, these things are going to get worse and worse. Okay, so that's all done over there. We're at the point here, still, coming back to the kings and queens. The divorce has happened. Now, Catherine is divorced. Mary's going to get pushed to the side. Henry's going to marry Anne of Boleyn, this young woman who's Protestant, very Protestant. He's going to marry her, and they're going to have a child, and that is going to be Elizabeth. And after that, their relationship is not going to go very well, and he doesn't get the boy that he wants. So him and Anne don't get along, and then she starts to sort of, hang out with other guys, and he accuses her of cheating on him, of infidelity, and she's unable to defend herself. But basically, the main reason is he gets tired of her being super Protestant, and he grew up. Henry was Catholic for most of his life, so inside he still wants to go to heaven. He still wants, when he dies, he wants people to light candles and pray for him because he thinks his soul is in jeopardy. And Anne is very Protestant and very independent, intelligent, and difficult. So although they fell in love and he divorced, for her, now he's got a problem is he can't manage her, and it's not likely that they're going to have children again because it doesn't seem like they have a relationship to make a child again. So he accuses her. He hears these rumors that she's spending too much time and she's making, jokes about his sexual activity, his sexual ability. So there's a trial, and she is found guilty, and they kill her. They cut her head off. So not only does he kill people he doesn't like in his government or his enemies, political enemies, or rebels or people who cross him, but his own wife, his second wife, he gets her head chopped off. The story gets more and more interesting and a little bit more like a horrible drama, like a horror drama, soap opera, horrible soap opera, more and more as you go along. So then he remarries again. This is his third wife. Well, I don't have to divorce Anne because I removed her head, so now I'm single again. That's an easy solution, I guess. And so he marries Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour is a young Protestant woman again, who is quite beautiful and attractive, and he marries her. She gets pregnant. She has a baby boy, which he's overjoyed about, and then she dies. And when Henry VIII dies, he will be buried next to her. And not to make a really horrible joke or anything, but he didn't seem to be able to get along with any woman for a long time. So in a way, Jane did exactly what he needed. He needed her, to be queen, get married to him, provide him with a son, and then leave, disappear. So that she did her duty, and he always said he loved her best. What if she had been queen for 20 years? Would he have stopped loving her, and would they have started fighting like he did with Anne? He didn't really fight with Catherine, to be fair, but he fought with Anne and then cut her head off. And Henry II eventually, put his wife in jail for the rest of her life because he couldn't stand her. But he didn't kill her. But Jane just dies because she gets an infection from the child. She dies from childbirth, so she immediately is gone. But Edward lives. So there he's got his son. He's going to marry 3 more times. So Henry VIII ends up having 6 wives. And I'm not going to talk about them. I'm just going to talk about the big 3 because there's Mary, Anne, and Jane. And then there's 2 more Catherines, right? There's 6 of them. I think there's 3 Catherines and 2 Annes. There's one more Anne. There's Anne of Cleves from Germany, and there's Catherine Parr and Catherine Howard. So there's 3. He marries 3 Catherines, 2 Annes, and a Jane. Only 3 names. So anyway, you just need to remember. You need to remember Catherine of Aragon, and you need to know Anne of Boleyn, and you need to know Jane Seymour. But actually, I'm not gonna ask you questions about that. Who's more important is their children, right? Catherine of Aragon, don't forget about her. These people are the important, not Anne, not even Anne. Okay, you can just remember that he cut his wife's head off, and there was 2 that he killed like that. But it's gonna go. Edward's gonna be first because he's the boy. He's gonna be king first. Then Mary's gonna be queen because she's the oldest of the 2 girls, and then both Edward and Mary are gonna die of disease. And that's going to open the door for Elizabeth to be the third brother or sister to lead. And that's what I'm going to talk about next time. Is I'm going to talk about the reign of Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, and then we're going to go into the Elizabethan era, essentially. All the things that happened up to and including Shakespeare, and that will be the 3rd lecture on the 16th century, which should close it and bring us into the 17th century and the English Civil War, okay? These lectures can't be any shorter than 45 or 50 minutes. So like I said, make sure, take a break. You don't need to listen to it all in a row, but once we get in the classroom, this is what it's gonna be like. Just 45 minutes. Any questions? No? You guys are tired? Need a break? Okay, let's take a break. Okay, have a lovely weekend. And I'm going to keep an eye on the numbers, and I'll let you know if we're going to start next Friday. If we're going to start, remember, every Wednesday will remain online. So you're always going to be watching 1 online lecture every week. That's never going to stop the entire semester. The question is, on Friday, are we going to have an in-person lecture? I think This is week 6. So I think as long as the numbers continue to go down, and the hospitalizations continue to go down, the weather is getting warmer, I think next Friday we should be able to begin lectures in person. But I will let you know on Wednesday. I'll let you know in the lecture about that. If we have an in-person class, then we're going to have to arrange a different time for the quiz, because the quiz is supposed to be at 11 o'clock on Friday morning. But I'm going to adjust the time because we can't be in class and writing quizzes online at the same time. So stay tuned for the information on that. I'll let you know by Wednesday. There'll be a notice on the Cyber Campus, and I will tell you in lecture 2. Okay, that's it. Enjoy the lovely weather we're having these days, and I will see you next Wednesday. Take care.